So this nice store that the people are coming out of now is actually the site of Giuseppe Morello, the first mafia king in New York. The first, he had a spaghetti restaurant here at 8 Prince Street. You can see it right there. Inside was the barrel murder. Now, I'll give you a little background about it. It was 5:30 in the morning. The sun was barely even up, if at all, on a Tuesday in 1903, on April 14th. And a woman who was heading towards her job for the day was walking down this street. This is Avenue D and 11th Street. Now they cut 11th Street off. But there used to be a lumber mill or a lumber yard right here on this corner. And she saw a barrel standing in the middle of the road. She thought, why is this barrel sitting upright in the middle of this road? Even though there's a lumber yard, it seems pretty out of place, and it's got a tarp or some sort of a canvas covering. So she goes over to the barrel and she lifts it. And she shrieks in horror. There is a human body stuffed inside the barrel, and it has his throat slit. And there's also sawdust at the bottom of the barrel. She calls the police, and they show up and do an investigation, and they find a few things in the man's pocket, but they don't know who this man is. He's got his throat slit from ear to ear, and he was clearly shoved in the barrel, stuck in the middle of this street right here, as a warning, as a show, something. It wasn't by accident. So they went on and did investigations to prove who this man was and why he was killed. You might be asking yourself, why is this important? Well, this is the first time that the mafia gets huge recognition. This is the first huge public hit. They had, killed people before and tried to dispose of their body, but this is the first time that they made a show of it. At least that was recorded. This was in 1903, and this is the Morello family, or what became known as the 107th Street Gang. Happened right here in the middle of the street. So this is where the Morello gang had their actual headquarters. It was 207 107th Street. It's been ripped down, and these projects have been built up there in its place. This is where this really interesting operation by the police occurred, and it's kind of like a daring raid type situation. They had to sneak into the house and make sure he was there or not, because they wanted to get everybody all at once. They didn't want any kind of shootings or anything like that, because these guys were kind of notorious for just doing anything to flee. So they had to do a very delicate operation, and I'll go on to explain that here inside the park. So I'm here in Franklin Apartments, right? And this would have been roughly located where Morello had his home. On this site, the police made a daring raid. And here, I'll give you a little more information about that now.
So on the night of November 15th, 1909, Thomas Callahan, who's a 17-year-old operative for the Secret Service who had been posing as a shoeshine boy, was hiding out in the building that was right here. He said it was very dangerous because it was a 4-story building with long hallways, closed stairways, and bare walls. He saw Morello and his brothers coming up the street, and he basically hid up in the top floor and then snuck out of the building and got the rest of the Secret Service. Morello grabbed a gun, but they managed to wrestle him to the ground, and they arrested all the members of his gang. When he was put away, Maranzano and Joe the Boss Mazzaria take over the mafia and splitting the one family into two. There's a big war. Everything's going crazy. But because of that war, that's where we get the basis of the 5 families. And we're going to see what happens to Maranzano and Joe the Boss Mazzaria right about now.
All right. Now what you're looking at now is a smoked fish import, I guess. So, but back in the 20s, this would have been a restaurant, and inside this restaurant is where Joe the Boss Mazzaria got whacked. So it would have been right here. We're in Coney Island. Just checking it out. Now, the killing of Joe the Boss Mazzaria was a really big deal because at that time there was basically Maranzano and Mazzaria, and they were having this huge war all over the city. People were getting shot every day and night, and it was really bad for business. Now, Lucky Luciano, who kind of came up in like the 5 Points kind of area, dealing with Jewish gangsters, Italians, you know, even black gangsters and Irish, he didn't care about like what you were, as long as you could make money together, right? So what he called the Mustache Pete's, the old school gangsters, where they were very fiercely loyal to each other. He thought that was a problem. They weren't going to make money that way. So he knew he had to kind of take out the guys. So he talked to Maranzano and basically told Maranzano he was going to have this done. So they went inside to this restaurant, him and Joe the Boss Mazzaria, Lucky Luciano, and they ate dinner, and then they played a card game. And then they, you know, were just chatting, and Lucky Luciano excuses himself to go to the bathroom. And when he goes to the bathroom, some gunmen come in, and they shoot Joe the Boss Mazzaria, who falls down, and you know, and all that stuff. And there's this very famous picture of him lying on the ground with the ace of spades in his hand. Now, of course, that was put in later by a reporter, but still, it was this whole thing about basically him taking over. Now, after that, then there was basically one boss, and that kind of calmed everything down. And then Lucky Luciano eventually set that up for him to get killed, to wipe out all the bosses, and we'll discuss that here. What you're looking at right here is the Helmsley Building. This is where Salvatore Maranzano had his offices. They were up all the way on the 9th floor. This is where he got whacked, and when that happened, it set Lucky Luciano on a course for, you know, maintaining control of the 5 families that he was setting up, and basically just ending all the violence and bloodshed that was considered unnecessary at the time. Right here where this deli grill is, this used to be the Midnight Rose candy store, and this is where Murder Inc. was actually located. The Mafia Murder Inc. from the 30s and the 40s. This is where their headquarters was, where they planned a lot of hits, and where they would just hang out. We're talking Albert Anastasia, we're talking Bugsy Siegel, all of those guys. It was right here in this building, which is in Brownsville in the Brooklyn. This is Sparks Steakhouse. This is where Paul Castellano was murdered. He was actually getting out right on the other side of this phone booth section here of his car when gunmen from across the street, who were parked probably where that BMW is, opened up fire. They killed him. He lay right here in the street. Right here. Right there. And they killed his driver over there. Now apparently down the street over here was John Gotti making sure everything was fine. Once the hit occurred, they drove off. So there's a lot of famous pictures from this area right here showing, you know, what happened here. So the assassins would have come from this area, and they would have shot this way at Paul Castellano and his driver. This is the exact spot. You can see this square right here. This is where a light pole fixture would have been. There's this picture of Paul Castellano draped out on the ground right here. And there's a tree, which is of course probably these ones here. But there's also a light fixture, which is right here. And that's like in between the cars. So the car would have pulled up. Let me just take a couple steps back here. The car would have pulled up right here. And this is where it all happened. This is where the man spent his last moments. And John Gotti took over. And of course, you know, you can... The story of John Gotti is very well publicized. And this will bring us to the end of our little mafia tour of New York. Now, there was a lot of things that were left out. Of course, you could go over all kinds of hits and all kinds of things. But there's a few locations that no one's really able to pin down, like where the big meeting of the Five Families was. We kind of have a general location that's in the North Bronx. But as far as major events, this is going to conclude it. So this is where, for all intents and purposes, the mafia as we know it ended. Now, there's still mafia going on. There's still a lot of that stuff. But the last big famous Don was John Gotti. And this was his hangout. This used to be the Ravenite Social Club. He had an apartment above it, probably where that guy is or something of that nature, where he would plot and plan his murders and crimes and all of those things. They used to walk around the block, and they could just stroll down this street here, and they would talk about things because they were afraid about being bugged. Well, the FBI and the authorities were bugging them, and that went through like 88 and 89. He was arrested in 1990, and he was convicted in 1992. Now, of course, there's, still mafia going on, but basically this is the end of everything right there.